It's time for us to check back in with Louisa in Mountain Path and see what happens next. If you've missed any of the previous readings, you can look in the description below for a playlist. I typically read a chapter every week. This week I'm not going to be able to make it through a chapter. You probably can hear it in my voice. I've had a severe sore throat. But I thought about not reading at all, but I'm like you. I want to know what happens next. You remember our last chapter was a real cliffhanger. We've got to find out what happens next. I couldn't wait either, so we're going to see how many pages I can make it through, but it probably will not be the entire chapter this week, but at least we'll find out what happened next. She was in the big house again. The fire shadows still danced and died, and the dog lay as he had lain before, his nose sideways on one black paw. It seemed such a long time since she had come down the stairs and across the room. She had not known then, yet the pattern of moonlight from the back window, where the firelight did not shine, still fell crookedly over one wooden bedpost and onto Rye's hair. Corey took Chris's new blue bacchanal, a present from his mother at Christmas, and put it about Teacher's shoulders. "I'm not cold," she said, and stood away from the fire. Corey pulled the two rocking chairs near the hearth. "Come and sit down, Teacher. It's no good a-standing." "Corey, can't we go when we know? I can't sit here and—" "Yes, ye can. I can. But you said you'd rather see Lee Buck dead. I don't want to see Chris dead." "You don't know what you're a-saying, Teacher. Come on and sit down. We'll be awaking the young'uns." She sat down then and looked with Corey into the fire and listened to the wind and heard the gentle breathing of the children and now and then sighs and soft, excited yips from the hound dog, who lay and dreamed, no doubt, that life was a long rabbit hunt in an eternal spring. She hated Corey. Corey sat so still with her chin in her hands and stared into the fire. How could she sit so still and think and think? They're maybe coming down the river now, maybe in the cave, walking soft and easy, stopping to listen with their bodies flattened against the stone walls. It would be so easy to run down the valley, slip in the back way, past the dogs, and tell Lee Buck and Chris. "Teacher, it's no good a-rocking that chair so," Corey said, and put her hand on the arm of the chair. "I didn't know I was doing that. I'll try to sit still the way you do." How can you sit so still?" Corey looked at her pityingly, she thought. "I hadn't ought to have told ye. You wasn't made for sich. Nobody ever was, to sit when they ought to do something." "I've lived through worse, Teacher." "How could it be worse? It couldn't be." Corey laid more wood on the fire. "You think I'm hard?" "Yes, tonight I do." I know. I mean it when I say I'd rather see Lee Buck dead than alive and knowing." She drew nearer the fire and stared into it, silent for a time. "That other night, 6 years back, was so long, Teacher. 'Peared like it'd never end. Sally Hayes was here a little while. It were hardly dusky dark when we stood out there on the porch and watched the men ride away. Them a-knowin', and us a-knowin', that come morning they mightn't all come home. And Lee Buck a-laughin' and a-settin' back'ards on his mule and a-wavin' to me." "But Lee Buck came back." "Yes, he come. But if'n he went again, he'd never come again. Maybe more dead up there and more in this end, and women all over this holler a-thinkin' on their dead men, and them of the livin' ones a-thinkin' the law or the Barnetts 'll git my man 'fore the sun goes down. This way he'll not be a-ridin' away from me again, me a-knowin'. He's still got a chancet." "Were the men gone all night that night?" "Mostly, I reckon. I recollect it was still dark in the little swag below Aunt Elgie's, but the birds was a-singin' in the poplar trees when I went up to Elgie's with Lee Buck's pistol. That was the hardest thing, Teacher. Davy never a-doin' nothin' wrong, and me a-slippin' Lee Buck's pistol onto his poor dead body, so when the high sheriff and the coroner came, they'd find him with the gun that killed the Barnetts." "I know now," Louisa whispered. and remembered that first afternoon in the loft room. She hated guns, too, after this one night, and Corey had had worse, she said. "And Elgie never a-knowin'," Corey went on. "Elgie never knowed, but I don't know as it mattered. It was the waitin'. She knew and waited, too, that night. Yes, Sally was a-goin' to have quiet in a month or so. I always blamed her a-tellin' on that, but she's never one to sit still with a still tongue. Anyhow, when she left me there that night, she went and sat with Algie for a spell and told her, and Algie walked about and hoed her flowers all night there in the moonlight, Peter said. And when they did bring him home, she kept a-telling him to get up and water the pretty by nights. Davy, he always helped his old ma carry water for her flowers. I couldn't do that. If I had a child like Pete and he grew up and went off like that, I couldn't wait." "You're a woman," Corey said, and paused to listen for a moment. "And woman has the hardest work of all, and that's the waitin'. 'Pears like all my life I've been a-waitin'. When I was little and Ma died, seemed like I waited forever to grow up. Now I've waited 9 months, 6 times for children to be born, and every time was hard, and 3 I've sat and watched and waited while they died. Me a-knowin', not a-hopin', just a-waitin'. That was hard." Yes. Strange how Corey could still sing and even laugh sometimes. "And so many nights I've sat and waited for Lee Buck to come home, not knowing everything but something like tonight." She was silent again, listening for footsteps or men's voices. Louisa listened too and heard nothing, only the hound dog and the fire and the children, heard the trees on the hill above the garden crackle in the cold, for the wind was still again. She turned to look at the bar of moonlight on the bed behind her. It was almost gone now. The moon would soon be straight over the river, with the bluff shadow falling narrow and deep. She looked into the fire again and heard a scarcely audible pat, pat, like children's bare feet going quickly over the ground or other feet coming from far away. She glanced at Corey. "What is that?" "Just the fire. I never heard it make a noise like that before. It's 'cause everything is so quiet. You have to be real still to hear the fire tramp snow." "Tramp snow?" "When the fire goes like that, people says it's a trampin' snow. Means fallin' weather, some say." Louisa sat and listened for a time, then with a sudden convulsive movement buried her face and ears in her arms. Corey smoothed her hair. "Don't be like that, teacher. Many's the time I've thought I couldn't listen to it. I wish the wind would blow hard, or a beetle cry, or anything." She raised her head and watched the flames as they made the gentle noise that she could hear even with her head buried in her arms. "I hate that noise," Corey said. "It's so little when a body sets long enough to they'll get so they might nigh hold their breath to hear it, and all the time not wantin' to. Some nights it has got me so I think that it was the feet of the ghost feet of my babies, not the men." "Hush," Louisa said. In a moment she would hear, like the Golston woman, Lee Buck's laughter in the wind and Chris calling Zoley home from a possum hunt. Corey was listening again, but not to the fire. "There's feet a-comin' over the barnyard," she whispered, and her hands clenched and unclenched the arm of the chair, but the rest of her was still. Louisa listened, but it seemed that the feet could have walked into the house and back again before she heard someone coming quickly over the snow in the road. They were on the porch now, and Corey whispered, "It's Lee Buck by himself." She knew without Corey's telling. The feet were too heavy for Chris's. The door was opening quickly and softly, and Lee Buck was in the room, standing still by the door, making no sound except for the quick breaths he drew. She tried hard to see his face, but Corey did not turn her head. "That ye, Lee Buck?" she said, and her voice, Louisa thought, sounded weak from too much gladness. How could she be glad when Chris was not home? She tried to ask but could not, and so only sat and waited until Lee Buck had stood a moment and then came nearer the fire. "You're still a-sittin'," he said. She could learn nothing from his voice. He only seemed to speak more quickly than usual. "Teacher had a bad dream and couldn't sleep. Something about Chris," Corey answered, speaking slowly, looking into the fire, taking her time about the lies she told. "Teacher with ye?" Lee Buck asked, and looked quickly over the chair back down into Louisa's face. A tongue of flame brought his eyes leaping suddenly out of the shadow, and she looked into them and thought that for once the man's gaze was not straight and open, but veiled and secret, shifting away to the dog and to Corey's hands, unclenched now and in her lap. "Where's Chris?" Corey asked after what seemed a long time. "In the cave. Working? No. Hayes with him? No. Where's Hayes? A-going up and down the river? In a boat? No. What's he doing?" "Just walking and looking. Teacher, everything will be all right. Why don't you go on to bed now?" "Let her be." Lee Buck glanced about the room. "Corey, where's all the grass sacks? I need some to put corn in." "Sacking corn this time of night?" "Yes. Get a move on, Corey. I ain't got all night. We've got to have something." "For what?" "To hide 'em when we take 'em out of the cave." "Take who out?" Lee Buck glanced at Louisa. "Bill Daltrey and Joe Coger." "Who are they?" "Men from the edge of Tennessee. They slipped in for Chris." "And you're a-slipping 'em out again?" "Yes. Dead. 'Peared like Chris was looking for trouble and was ready when it come. Get the sacks, Corey." Corey did not move. "They got Chris too?" Lee Buck kicked a burning stick of wood deeper into the fire. "No, he's hurt. In the chest, maybe, just his shoulder." "And you left him?" "Had to. Hayes thought that maybe might be more hanging around outside. Get them sacks, Corey." Corey got up. "I'll get the sacks," she said, "and we'll go back with you." "We need you, but teacher?" Louisa put her arms into the sleeves of the mackinaw. "I will go too," she said. Is Chris really all right?" "I wouldn't lie to you, teacher. Chris, he ain't what you'd call all right, but he ain't dead." "Don't be thinking ahead now, teacher," Corey said. "Just carry this pine knot low, like so. I can see to hunt the sacks in the kitchen. I don't want it to be told that somebody seed a light laid at Lee Buck Cow's this night." "No," Lee Buck said. He followed them into the kitchen, and while they looked in the corner behind the cupboard, opened the back door away, and stared up the valley. "I keep a-wondering," he said, "how'd them men know just where to come, Corey? Somebody give 'em the boat they come in. They couldn't have packed it clean down from Tennessee. I wished I'd knowed." "You'll never know," Corey answered, her face and arms hidden by the gunny sacks she held. "It might have been most anybody or nobody. Them men was after Chris powerful hard. Somebody loaned 'em a boat. Maybe they stole it or bought it off somebody, the other folks not knowing what they wanted it for. I wished I could find out. Arter this night you can't go a-hunting and a-asking questions, and now's not the time to be wishing and a-wondering." "That's right," Lee Buck said, and closed the door. So the excitement continues to build. Now we know that Lee Buck's made it back home all in one piece, but Chris sounds like he's been shot. Sounds like they've killed the other men. Now they've got to figure out what to do about that. Lots of drama, and the climax, you can tell, of the whole book's coming. This chapter is leading up to it for sure. Beyond just the dramatic, keeping you on the edge of your seat, the nail biter in this chapter that I enjoyed was I really loved the part about them listening to the fire. Those kind of weather lore sayings like the fire tramping snow are things I've heard my whole life living here in the area of Appalachia where I live. Of course, Louisa was in Kentucky, but much of Appalachia shares that same continuance of folklore and superstition and cultural ways, all those kind of things. So I really enjoyed that part. I've always been fascinated to listen to fire, whether I'm sitting outside around a campfire, whether it's in the summer or the winter, either one. or even just sitting by the wood stove in the basement, even with the door shut, you can hear the logs whisper, you can hear them falling, you can hear all those things, the sparks going up the chimney, up the pipe. All those things have always been mesmerizing to me. Sometime I'll try to read to you. John Paris has a great little article that he wrote about whispering logs and what they mean, what all the sounds mean. And like Corey was saying, if you hear someone, like it's tramping, like someone walking across the snow, it means it's going to snow. So that's a pretty common one. You may know some of them. If you do, please leave a comment and let me know about them. Also, leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you from this chapter. Sorry I couldn't read the whole thing. I can feel my voice giving out even as I speak right now, so I'm going to stop. But please tune back in next week. My throat will be better, and we will find out what else happens next to Louisa in Mountain Path.